This is a strong candidate for the worst film I've ever seen. Like, I think this one may have actually broken me. Good evening, everyone. My name is Celeste de la Cabra. Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to go through the entire September slate in terms of the subscriber releases for Vinegar Syndrome. In case you're unfamiliar with this segment, I'm going to go through the entire subscriber slate. I'm going to unbox them for you, and I'm going to give you a relatively in-depth, spoiler-free review of the film, and then review of the release, including discussions on all the special features. But before we get started, if you are at all interested in in-depth discussions on cult and art house films, please go ahead and click the subscribe button, click the like button, leave me lovely comments to read, and share this with a pal. There is also a link in the description for my Patreon account, whereby you can get access to at least 3 patron-exclusive videos per month and customized handwritten postcards. And I think it's pretty neat, and your support is greatly appreciated. So let's go ahead and start with Arnold. There's your slipcover, side, and the back artwork. I'm a big fan of this artwork. I really like the color scheme on it. And then we do have reversible original poster art back with the special features and such. And there's the inside. So Arnold is one that my friend Sam Deegan, the new special features producer over at Vinegar Syndrome, was especially excited about. She was saying how this was like a really underseen kind of gothic horror comedy classic. And it's true that this seems to have been severely underseen over the years. There weren't a ton of people that had anything to say about it or had seen it previous to this release. And it looked like the history of the film was pretty spare in that it had a very short theatrical run and then didn't get a ton of love, if any, on home video and showings on cable TV and things of that nature. I think this definitely fits within the kind of canon or purview or general milieu of Vinegar Syndrome's catalog, because it is a pretty macabre kind of gothic horror type thing. But it definitely has more like overt comedy leanings, and it's a little bit more goofy than I think a lot of their films are. No, that's not to say that they don't ever put out horror comedies or goofy films, but this one, I mean, it has a PG rating, and it does kind of have that vibe to it, but that kind of is baffling to me, if I'm being honest, because there's some pretty graphic scenes and material in here, and the whole film really is centered around a kind of necrophilia. So to give a brief synopsis, the film is about a really rich man who passes away and arranges it such that he gets married after he's dead, so that he can give his inheritance to his girlfriend as opposed to his legal wife. It's a pretty absurd, kind of ridiculous, convoluted premise, but it's one that's kind of tried and true, this kind of idea of a family competing for a rich family member's estate or inheritance. He does this under the condition that she actually like go through with it and behave such that she is married to this man, and he has consequences planned for those who don't listen. Again, don't go into this expecting it to make a whole ton of sense. Just kind of go into it expecting really kind of wacky violence, a really kind of macabre black comedy sense of humor, and some really fun, really pleasant gothic atmosphere, if that's the kind of thing you're into, which, you know, I am. The film definitely plays like a kind of satire on like the absurdity of rich people and what they do with their wealth and the lengths that they will go to acquire even more wealth. Again, it does have this PG rating, so don't expect too much in the way of like overt sexuality or sleaziness, but it definitely is there and is hinted at. And there's a barmaid that has, let's call it, extensive coverage on her ample bosom, and there's some fun bits as it relates to that. And there's a scene that's referenced on the back of the slipcover where our lead is kind of running in skimpy clothing in a dream sequence. And, you know, you have those things in it. And it does kind of skirt this weird line between feeling like it is made for family audiences and being strictly made for adults. It kind of toes that line. The main thing here, other than the really witty, clever, kind of amusing writing and the fun, sort of absurd circumstances that play out throughout the film, is again the gothic atmosphere. There's this really incredible cemetery that a lot of the film takes place in, and it's very much like on a set. It's very much on a stage, but it just has the fucking vibe, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. It feels a lot like Hammer horror. Like, it's got that kind of British nobility and humor to it, and it has that kind of of ornate beauty in its set design and in its costuming and all those other things. So it's kind of like if Hammer made a goofy like TV comedy kind of thing. So let's go ahead and talk about the special features on this release. Unfortunately, this is a fairly bare bones release, kind of uncharacteristically so for Vinegar Syndrome. There's only 2 features on here, other than like a standard trailer and that kind of thing. There's a commentary with Mike White from the Projection Booth podcast, and there is a video essay by Sam Deegan. This video essay is the one that I would really recommend you check out. I think it's really great. It is very listenable and informative and comes in at about 22 minutes or something like that. She really kind of explores the tradition of the gothic horror comedy that this film resides in and is a part of. It is a tradition that is well over 100 years old at this point, in the cinematic tradition at least. And she also goes into the history of the old dark house trope, which is sort of another subgenre or style that Arnold falls into as well. She kind of goes over the history of the trope and how many directors kind of come back to it as a tried and true formula for storytelling. She kind of explores the themes of this trope as well. The horror comedy, the old dark house, and also this idea of a big bag of money being the prize for a person's death as like a plot device. She kind of explores how that trope can be used to explore themes of American greed and instant wealth acquisition and things of that nature. It's very much an American and sort of capitalistic sort of trope. So overall, that is Arnold. I really loved it. I gave the film an 8 out of 10, and I highly recommend it for anybody who's a fan of gothic horror or horror comedy, or just generally more outside the box sort of macabre, humorous horror films. Okay, so next let's talk about Evil Judgment. So there's your slipcover, there's the back of it. Take a guess what style or what genre this film comes from. There's your original art, synopsis and special features, and the inside. So Evil Judgment is a Canadian giallo-inspired slasher film that follows a waitress who decides to try full-service sex work for a night to see if she can make some money and to get back at her really shitty boyfriend. Some unexpected macabre things happen in the course of that night, and she is sort of thrust into this really sort of convoluted and far-reaching conspiracy plot that involves politicians and lawyers and the police and all sorts of things. So that's your kind of basic premise. The film, I think, is quite well made and fairly entertaining. The director talks about it in a lot of the special features, but the giallo influence here is pretty obvious, like the really super stylized lighting and the black glove killer and the really ultra-violent violence against women in the film. The influence is just really clear and really obvious, but I think it's done really well, and I think it is overall paced pretty well too. Like a lot of these films, I've talked about giallos in many different avenues, or jolly, I guess technically, in many different avenues, and the thing I keep coming back to is the pacing and how much I tend to struggle to care about the detective story and how I just want it to go back to like the super stylized horror stuff. This, I think, strikes a pretty good balance, even though I think the plot is probably needlessly convoluted and confusing. I know that like in the special features, the director talks about wanting to go out of his way to make a smarter slasher film, or not fall into every single trope, or have a story that is more than just hack and slash, like stalking killer kind of thing. I think he succeeds in making a film that is fairly unique in the context of its genre. To be fair, it is also partially due to the fact that I'm kind of an idiot and I often struggle to understand basic plots. Like maybe it's my neurodivergence, or maybe it's the fact that I'm always thinking about themes and craft and things like that. But sometimes I just miss important plot details and I get very confused. And this was one of those instances where I found myself very confused by the end of this, and I had to kind of backtrack and have people help me understand what happened on a basic like plot level. So I guess know that going into it, one, that the film is a little bit convoluted, and two, that I am an idiot, but setting that aside. Yeah, I don't know, I think the performances are really good. I think that the special effects are good. I think that the cinematography is really good. There's a lot of really interesting and beautiful sets here, and like on location photography that I'm a big fan of. There's some really fun kind of awkward scenes as well that I think that are amusing, but I actually think that this has some interesting themes as it relates to gender and as it relates to police and corruption. Like a lot of, if not all of the men in this film really fucking suck and are just awful, and it's just like to varying degrees. You kind of have like this plot structure where you're introduced to more and more men and they get progressively shittier as the plot goes on. The way that it handles sex work is really interesting too. Like there's characters in here that obviously hate it such that it results in violence and a lot of like really misogynistic shaming and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, the sex worker characters are actually quite strong and hold their own and like are human beings. And I think that this film is more progressive on sex work than you might expect. And again, any film that kind of hinges on its violence against women is going to have to strike an interesting balance of like how much we're reveling in that and how problematic that is versus like what we're actually saying about it. Because violence against women, especially at the hands of men, is not like something that was invented for the horror film. It's something that women have to deal with every single day, and that patriarchal society kind of not only encourages but looks away from when it happens, ignores when it happens. So there's a lot here to like. I just think the plot maybe is a little too complicated for its own good, and at the end of the day, it is like, I would probably put it slightly above average in terms of my enjoyment of like your average slasher or giallo film, but I think it's definitely more unique and interesting than a lot of those, especially to talk about. So in terms of the special features, there is a director's commentary that is pretty good. There's also a really great interview with the director. He kind of spends a lot of that time discussing the history of watching and making movies in his own personal life. Like, it's something that he used to do when he was younger, like every single day. He would like skip classes to go to the movies and stuff like that. He also talks about the tax incentive structure, which is something that comes up time and time again in the special features. Essentially, the Canadian government offering like ridiculous tax breaks to people who invested in Canadian filmmaking, and the popularity of the slasher genre at the time kind of worked in perfect harmony to enable him to make this film. He says he wanted to make a more complex slasher, which, as I stated earlier, I think he succeeds in. And he claims that he was, quote, subconsciously influenced by giallo films, but come on. Come on. Next is an interview with the associate producer. One of my favorite anecdote from this was when, okay, so throughout the making of this film, they had to take a break of like a couple of years just to raise more money, and, you know, things happen. And so achieving continuity between those two periods was especially difficult, and they had to find a very specific car to match the previous shots that had been used with it, and it was extremely difficult for them to find, such that the associate producer was literally just driving down the highway and saw somebody driving it and literally like flagged him down like while he was driving and asked if they could use his car, and he said yes. Like, that's a great story, you know. And now he actually produces IMAX films and makes mostly nature documentaries, but he credits the working on this film with as one of the most influential and important things that he's done in terms of teaching him how to make films. Next is an interview with the composer, whose name is Corky Lang. This is a really kind of unique and interesting quirky interview. He's just kind of a funny person and kind of like a stereotype of like a weird kind of hippie dude, even though I know he hates that characterization. He really spends a lot of the time just trying to remember the names of the films that he works on, or that he's worked on. He like asks his phone, he like asks Siri what some of the names of these films are in the interview. I thought it was very fun. Next is an interview with Calum Vanstal. I'm so sorry if I butchered this person's name. He kind of goes through the influence of the giallo genre on Canadian exploitation films. This to me is like your must-see special feature on the disc. Don't skip this if you have it. It's just a really excellent overview on giallo films in general, the Canadian tax system, and the history of giallo influenced Canadian films specifically. Another interesting anecdote here, or factoid of sorts, is that the Canadian market really couldn't rely on like the drive-in to help make money back on exploitation and like horror films. Just because of the weather up in Canada, you just can't rely on it in the same way. He talks about how the incentive for cheap outsider films to be made in Canada, plus this kind of cheap to make stylish genre that was coming from Italy that could be marketed as standard sleaze, kind of combined to create the Canadian giallo, which I thought was a really interesting intersection of incentives and creativity. So overall, I give the film a 6 out of 10, and the release itself is great. Like, the special features are really excellent, and it's a good restoration and everything, and I do recommend this one, especially if you're into Canadian films, or if you're into giallos or slashers. Like, if that's really your jam, like, I think that this is one you should pay attention to for sure. Okay, so the next one we're going to discuss is Ghost Nursing. There's your sick-ass fucking artwork there. Some more sick artwork there. Got your spine. And then I am a big fan of this reversible original poster art. Look at this. You got the same dude, but he's on like a fucking baby. What the fuck is that about? You got a weird freak down here. There's a lot going on here. But just, I don't know. It's not focusing. There it is. What the fuck? I don't know, man. There's the back. And There's your inside. Okay, so essentially ghost nursing is about a woman who keeps getting hit on by weird dudes and she wants it to stop. So she goes to this kind of like, I don't know what the technical or specific term is for it, I apologize, but like a kind of shaman or like religious figure, monk type person to place like a, it's not a curse or like a blessing, some kind of spiritual protection over her such that these people stop doing this. And so she is given like a fetus that she then has to feed blood to keep this up. Like if she stops doing it, it'll stop working. I'm struggling a little bit, as you can tell, to describe the plot of this because this was another one where, again, maybe I'm just an idiot. Maybe there's something lost in translation here, but I had a hard time keeping up with this one too. Probably because plot is not exactly the primary thing that they were focused on here, so much as just how fucking batshit insane, zany shit they wanted to cram into this. Like how far they could take this thing. It is really a pretty wild and bizarre film. It is fairly entertaining, and especially the last act just is really balls to the wall insanity. Yeah, I don't know, if you're really into the gonzo weirdo kind of Hong Kong shit, the black magic films, gory Cat 3 type stuff, you probably don't want to miss this one. Although I gotta say, at least in some part, due to how challenging I found it to keep up with this and follow what was going on, I did kind of feel it suffered a bit from pacing issues, and I think I ended up giving the film a 6 out of 10, but I honestly think that that's mostly on me and not the film. Like my unfamiliarity with this genre and some of the cultural touchstones here, like I think it is on me. And I think that I would be rewarded by subsequent viewings. So take that relatively low rating with a grain of salt, because I think that if this is like your jam, like this is your shit, you're always watching films like this, like it's kind of a no-brainer. So let's talk about the special features. Kind of like Arnold, this is a sort of uncharacteristically light or bare bones release. There's just an interview and a video essay. So the interview was with the actor Billy Chan, who was in the film. He discusses kind of how they shot a lot of these films in Thailand, and this film in particular was shot in Thailand. He talks about the production process for like the posters that would be made for these films, how a lot of the times if they didn't have like a fully made art piece or poster ready to go, like the studio would literally just commission one, like kind of randomly. Maybe not randomly, but like without consulting them too much, like they just hire an artist and that'd be that. It also ends with a really great quote, which I will relay here. At the end of the interview, he says, "Please watch more scary movies. Scary movies are fun." I think that's a message we can all take on board and take to heart and really unite us all in these sort of polarized times. I think we can get on board with that one. Next is the video essay by Sam Deegan. This is one of my favorite video essays I've seen all year. It really is just excellent in its analysis and in its historical information as well. She really just does an excellent job giving an overview of the history of like ghost films and black magic films in Hong Kong cinema. She talks about the political origins of the Category 3 rating and how it was kind of a reaction to like a shifting in power. She talks about how ghost nursing fits in and also subverts elements of the black magic genre, because typically what you will see in this black magic type stuff is, at least according to her, is, because I haven't seen a ton of these films, so I'm not pretending like I'm the source of this information or anything like that. According to Sam, tons of films in this genre are really just about men using black magic to essentially coerce women into sleeping with them. And because it's like this kind of magical like drug of influence, it almost functions as like a date rape plot device. And ghost nursing does this really interesting thing where it kind of subverts this. Because rather than men using it to sleep with women, it's women using it to prevent men from sleeping with them and to like kind of keep creepy dudes away. I thought that that was a really interesting point of how this film is sort of unique and subversive in the larger canon of films like it. So again, like I don't know that I would start here if you're like new to Hong Kong cinema or like Category 3 stuff or black magic films or kind of weirdo films like this. Maybe not your best entry point, but if you're a fan or if you're just feeling particularly adventurous, I'd say go for it. I think that this is a fairly solid and subversive film, and some good supplements on it too. So I say pick it up. Okay, and finally, let's talk about, I don't even know how to intro this. Curse of the Screaming Dead. Let's just do a fairly neutral unboxing of this first. I do like the artwork quite a bit. I think that the slip is great. There's your original reversible art with the original title, Curse of the Cannibal Confederates. There's the back And because this is actually technically a 2-film set, and there's a good amount of special features on it, you do get 2 discs on this one. So I'm actually not 100% sure how I should go about talking about this, because I originally, after I'd watched the films, because there's 2 of them, I had planned to come on here and just have a really fun kind of thrashing and bashing of 2 of the worst films I've ever seen in my life, and to just fully say, steer clear, I cannot in good conscience recommend any of this, it's all fucking trash, garbage, you know, that kind of thing. But then I watched the supplements, and the supplements are actually some of the best of Vinegar Syndrome Slate this year. Like, the special features are really quite astounding and like really, really impressive, and entertaining and informative, and like kind of made the whole experience worth it. It is kind of maybe unfortunate that of this slate, far and away the worst films had far and away the most features on them, but you know, the director and the cast and people in general were just really willing to talk about this stuff. So I think that is probably the primary driver for like what special features end up on a release. Like, well, are people willing to talk about it? You know, like how much are they willing to talk about it? Like, what are the lengths to which they're able to put forth effort? You know, I don't think that, like, Vinegar Syndrome was like, fuck Arnold and Ghost Nursing, like, those things are garbage. It's just more like, well, those are super obscure, and the people involved either aren't around or weren't willing to talk about it, you know? Or weren't accessible, you know? But in any case, let's talk about the films first. Curse of the Screaming Dead. I started with this one, although maybe if you do end up buying this, or if you already have it, I might recommend watching them in the opposite order. This is the primary like feature on the release, but it is technically a remake of sorts of the other film that's included, Night of Horror. And maybe you'll appreciate it more after having to sit through that, because while this is one of the worst films I've ever seen, it is leagues better than that one. Essentially, it's about a group of friends who are going on some kind of hiking, camping type beat trip. And they happen upon a Confederate like graveyard. They find some artifacts like a Confederate flag and shit, and they decide to keep it, and then the Confederate zombies arise. The plot really isn't much more than that. I mean, I guess I'll try not to spoil anything, but there's not much to spoil, honestly. Like, that's your setup, and that's kind of the whole thing, you know? So when I was watching this, I was really kind of struck by one thing in particular, in that, you know, obviously it's really important to watch good films, to know what good films look like, you know? You have to be aware of good filmmaking and analyze and learn about and expose yourself to good filmmaking to understand what that is and to possibly replicate it, right? But there are films that exist that are so bad that they kind of make you appreciate even the fundamentals of filmmaking and kind of make you appreciate just even the bare minimum level of competency in a film production. Again, I don't want to seem like too much of a hater or like I'm just bashing this for fun. Like, at the end of the day, people did put their heart and soul into this and like did put a lot of work into this. And I'm not saying that the filmmaker is like trash or like a bad person or like has no talent whatsoever or anything like that, but there are decisions in this that are really just baffling to me. Like, I don't know, people will be having a conversation and it'll be like shot, reverse shot the entire time, like for each individual sentence, and it's because they couldn't memorize their lines, and it's because they didn't necessarily have everybody on set that day. But like the whole time I'm just like, hey man, if you pull the camera back a little bit, you'll have them both in the frame and they can have a conversation, you know? Or like, I'm struggling to remember some more specifics, maybe because I'm having like a trauma response and my brain is kind of like pushing it out. But there were such bizarre like editing choices and like blocking choices and things that felt like they had very easy fixes, where I just felt like I was witnessing a very specific lack of quality here. In terms of the themes, I also have to kind of discuss how kind of like nakedly offensive this is too, so maybe I feel a little bit less bad about shitting on it, but like, you know, when this was announced, I was like, oh, it's about Confederate zombies. That could be a fun idea. That could be an interesting idea if you have something to say about it. I'm not gonna say that this director is like a guy with a Confederate flag on his lawn and on his car or something like that, or like that he's like a white supremacist making white supremacist films or something, but like, both of these films are about dead Confederates in a way that has a sort of reverence that I feel these people are not, like, should not be afforded. In this one, it is particularly offensive. There's a kind of thematic subplot where, like, the whole reason that they're upset that their trinkets have been stolen is because you've stolen their pain. And there are some Japanese characters in it who say that it is just like... they compare it to what their parents had to go through in Hiroshima and what it was like going through the trauma of that. I don't know, just it's pretty on its face, fairly offensive, right? Like, I don't know, to compare, like, because like in this film in particular, like the Confederate soldiers have been captured by like a Union general or whatever and tortured and killed, right? That's obviously not a great thing to go through. Nobody wants that, right? But like context is important, right? Of course. And to compare like the Confederacy that explicitly existed to own human beings and to like enshrine racism into like a separate state entirely, to compare that entity to the victims of one of the worst war crimes in all of history, like it's like, oh, the pain that they each experienced are like, you know, part of this like shared spiritual connection of suffering. Like I find that idea to be pretty reprehensible, to be honest. Like the Confederate soldiers are the bad guys in so far as they are like flesh-eating zombies, but it's mostly like sympathetic to them. The reasons that they're doing this are portrayed as being understandable because of what they went through and the desecration of their legacy and their graves, you know? This is a guy who grew up in Virginia, I think. Hi, me too. And so there's definitely a lot of Confederate shit around here. I can tell you that not everybody is cool with it. At least for me personally, I've never ever been a person that like has been sympathetic to that or has ever wanted to defend the Confederate flag or something like that. But, you know, these people exist and it is kind of part of the culture. So I do understand how he could have got there in kind of like an ignorant way. But, you know, there's part of me that feels like this is purposeful and consistent enough that there's a more insidious message here. The special features did not convince me of that, as he had nothing to say about the themes and it was really just roasting his own movie about how bad it is, which is fun. But yeah, I don't know, maybe that's enough ranting about the problematic themes inherent in this film. So next let's talk about Night of Horror. This is the original film that was then remade shortly thereafter. I sort of posted this on my Instagram after I had finished watching this with my 1 out of 10 rating and kind of said something to the effect of like, this is a strong candidate for the worst film I've ever seen. Like, I think this one may have actually broken me. Like I could feel my psyche and my patience and my mind just sort of collapsing as the film went on. It almost feels like a purposeful endurance test more than an actual like work of filmmaking. And in fact, the whole reason that it was remade is because when he tried to sell this to distributors, they essentially told him, hey man, nothing happens in this. Here's some extra money to shoot some like gore inserts and stuff. And he was like, oh, this is enough money to just make a whole other film. We just redo it, which is, I guess, indicative of the budgets or lack thereof that we're working with here. There's scenes that seemingly like never end. Like you kind of start with like two guys sitting at a bar facing away from the camera, which is a really baffling, kind of inexplicable way to start your horror film. And for like 10 minutes, they're talking like into the bar away from the camera. We then kind of go into footage of them getting in it, like all these people getting into a camper and going off on a camping trip. And we just kind of get shots of the camper driving over the highway for a while, like several minutes. By this point, this almost felt like a kind of avant-garde, like slow cinema thing going on here. And I was sort of on board with it until we get to like the meat of the film, which is sort of, again, the same premise where like these Confederate soldiers have been awakened from the grave and kind of relay their tales of woe and trauma. And we get to like a Civil War reenactment sequence that is just so poorly shot and put together such that there is no like narrative happening or context for these shots or like even an order that feels like it makes sense. Like we're just seeing kind of haphazard shots of a Civil War reenactment back to back to back with no narration and no real structure. And there is an original song over it. And like, you know, bless these people. Like they, in the special features, they keep talking about how good the song is. It's horrible. Like it's such a bad song and it's so schmaltzy and cheesy and over the top. And it's just so overbearing over this seemingly endless amount of like random Civil War footage that's just kind of there. And it lasts for what feels like an eternity. Like at this point, I could feel myself like starting to break like my my commitment to doing these reviews and to like giving everything a fair shake. Like I could feel it crumbling in real time. And then we get to like, I think this actually happens first, and the Civil War shit is like a reprieve in a sort of manner of speaking from what it makes up the bulk of the film, which is like the Confederate soldiers just kind of talking at our characters, except they talk at such a pace that like I could feel my patience like being broken down with these voices like a hammer going at my psyche or something. I'm gonna try to attempt to help you understand what it was like here. So for the next little bit, going to review the film like this. How much of this do you think you could take watching a real film and not just a silly YouTube video? It's insufferable. It goes on for just an eternity of that. Okay. If you can't tell, I think the film is really bad, and we're gonna leave it at that. Now that I'm done roasting this shit, or being mean, or being negative, or whatever, because that's not really what I like to do, I'm gonna go into some positives, and I'm not just making this up. Like, this shit is actually, like Vinegar Syndrome kind of knocked it out of the park. Like, when I was done watching these films, I told my partners, like, look, I never say this. I believe everything deserves to be, like, restored and preserved and given, like, this sort of loving treatment and release. But this is trying, like, my belief at its core. I don't know about this. I don't know that this was worth the resources they put into it. But, you know what? I will say that was an emotional reaction to just how bad this stuff was, but like clearly there are fans of it, like as the special features kind of illuminated, and I don't think it is so completely horrible and offensive that it should like be completely forgotten about or anything like that. So yeah, let's just go ahead and go into the special features. First is a kind of like feature length, I think it's 50 minutes, newly commissioned or newly created documentary from Vinegar Syndrome about Curse of the Screaming Dead. It's quite good and quite entertaining. The director seemed like straight up uncomfortable or embarrassed by these films, even though like he is credited as the director on almost all of these special features, which I don't think I've seen before, but that was interesting. But he's just kind of making like this face all the time, like in between his sentences. He'll be like, yep, I made Curse of the Screaming Dead. Yep, that happened. That kind of thing, you know? I don't know, a lot of the cast members that are interviewed, some of them will be diplomatic and will be like, yeah, it was a good learning experience, and like, you know, the film is rough around the edges, but I have a soft spot for it. There's one guy who just keeps consistently being like, yeah, fucking sucked. That was stupid. This was stupid. Like, why did he do that? It baffles me. I don't understand it. And then you'd like, there's some really amusing editing, which again, it's crazy to me that he directed this, where he's like, yeah, we decided to use this effect, and I thought it would probably, you know, come off pretty well on screen. And then it cuts to the guy and he's like, yeah, it was fucking stupid. Of course it looked bad and fake. What did you expect? And then it cuts back to him and he's like, yeah, maybe it wasn't such a good idea. Maybe it was kind of stupid. Okay. After that, there's an interview with the special makeup effects artist, Bart Mixon. He calls everything a show instead of a film for some reason, like whether he's talking about a TV series or a documentary or a feature film, he always calls it a show. I thought that was interesting. He did some really cool masks for the film, and he's actually gone on to do work on like really huge stuff for Disney and Marvel and companies like that. Next is a featurette with the composer, Charlie Burnett, and recording engineer Jim Krenka. Sorry. This is a super informative and extremely entertaining interview. Charlie spends most of the time like talking shit and roasting the film, and complaining about modern film scores, just saying that they have no soul or personality and are only focused on doing things as like easily and cheaply as possible. He does the interview in front of a piano, so we can kind of like demonstrate some piano cues and like what he would have done differently had he done it today. It was super fascinating, honestly. You know, it's also worth mentioning that like the film scores are especially bad in these, like, and I feel okay saying that because he thinks so too. He kind of wrote like one motif that he just uses over and over and over and over and over again throughout the entire score, and it's pretty grating, to be honest. Next is another feature-length documentary on Night of Horror. Cool that they did one for each film. This is super entertaining, and the people involved seem to be aware of the quality of the film, or lack thereof, but of course a lot of them still have an affinity for it. This is one of my favorite features that I've watched all year. Next is a interview with, they're credited as Night of Horror fans. I was like, okay. I guess to be a fan of this film is noteworthy enough to get your own special feature, but no, they're actually like industry people. Like they are kind of like filmmakers who work in TV at the moment. They're sisters. Their names are Rosie Nakamura and Autumn Nakamura Neal. I don't know, they just kind of tell the story of how they found the VHS tape and it became like a meme or like a yearly tradition in their family, or even like a kind of almost like a hazing ritual for like new friends or partners or whatever. Like, can you get through this shit? I don't know, their enthusiasm about it like almost convinced me that like I was mistaken, and like if I watched it again I'd love it. That didn't happen when I watched the commentary, I'll just say that. But my favorite little bit about this is that they had a band at one point called the Celluloid Sluts. I can't find anything about them on Google, so I'm almost wondering if I can get away with stealing that name because it's so fucking good. Anyway, next is another interview with Nightmare USA author Stephen Thrower. This is just such an incredible interview. Like, it was at this point where I was like, what the hell? Why are some of the best special features I've seen all year on this shit? He just kind of gets really close to actually like intellectually convincing me that these films are great, and I like fully misinterpreted them, or like I'm the idiot for thinking they're bad. Even though he kind of says as much throughout, he's like, yeah, they're bad, but like, hear me out. What if they're actually great? Like, it's actually this kind of like subversive art project, and like making some kind of comment on like the structure of cinema itself and all this other stuff. It's just so good. It's like a fantastic history of and analysis of both the films and their style. And then there's a commentary for both films from the director and the actor who is in both of them. I think his name is Steve something. You know, I think the documentaries are better. I don't think you need to sit through these films again to get the commentary, but there's some interesting and amusing little bits here and there. And I was able to confirm after watching those interviews that like, yeah, it's still trash. My favorite bit, I think, was when the Curse of the Screaming Dead trailer started. These are recorded in chronological order, by the way, so watch the Night of Horror commentary first if you decide to subject yourself. He kind of opens it and he's like, welcome back to more torture. At least they are aware, right? Anyway, that's all the features for this. I cannot in good conscience recommend that you purchase this, but I think I've talked about it extensively here, and I think that I can trust that you are an adult and you can make your own financial decisions. And you know, maybe not if you have like, I don't know, some kind of medical condition where you're like teetering on the edge and like something like this could kill you. Maybe stay away from it in that instance. But other than that, I think you have to make your own informed decisions about a film this bad, I guess. Yeah, that's a rough one. Probably the worst films I've seen all year. But the release, I gotta say the release is pretty fantastic. So, and that's that. That's Vinegar Syndrome's September slate. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. A lot more roasting in this than usual because that's not really what I do or what I aim to do. But sometimes it's just unavoidable, I think. And I typically tend to save my rage for like really awful Christian propaganda films or like Birth of a Nation or something like that. But this is kind of like racially and socially questionable in its politics and in its messaging. So maybe that's my excuse to be this mean. Anyway, let me know what you think. If you've seen any of these, or if you plan on picking up any of them, let me know as well. I always like to know that. Let me know what you think. Just in general, I'd love to read your comments. I like making this a dialogue as opposed to me talking at you until my voice hurts in my computer, in my microphone, you know? Again, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, leaving comments, and sharing this with a pal are great ways to support this channel non-monetarily. If you'd like to support it monetarily, however, there are links in the description for my Patreon, channel membership, and Amazon wishlists. And your support is greatly appreciated. There is that list if you want to get me a little Christmas gift. You don't have to, of course, but I will shout you out in the video, and it will make me happy, and it will bring me joy. So, you know, things to consider. And there's also links in the description for my social media accounts, should you like to be a little bit more intimate. And with that, I will bid you farewell, and well wishes and safety should you decide to watch Curse of the Screaming Dead or Night of Horror. And with that, remember that Satan loves all of their children. Bye. I'd like to take a moment to thank our newest patrons, Dustin Lewis, Carlin Cook, Chad G, John D, and Kyle Carr. I'd also like to thank our accomplices, Anthony Listro, The Boogeyman's Closet, Deanna Vave, The Disconnected, Dustin Putman, Enrique Bernal, George Strang, Julie Humphris, Nosferatu 1334, Peppa Crab, Ronnie, and Sasha Bobashasaurus. If you'd like to be counted amongst their ranks, the link is in the description.